السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا لتؤمنوا بالله ورسوله وتعزروه وتوقروه وتسبحوه بكرة وأصيلا. صدق الله العظيم. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم محمد سيد الكونين والثقلين والفريقين من عرب ومن عجم. يا رب بالمصطفى بلغ مقاصدنا واغفر لنا ما مضى يا واسع الكرم. We mentioned with regards to the early propagation of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how when Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam began to preach Islam openly in the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah, how the mushrikeen, how the polytheists, the idol worshippers, how they turned against Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they began to persecute and they began to torture the Muslims. Now this continued for many years, that the mushrikeen, the kuffar of Makkah, they would punish the Muslims, they would torture them, they would persecute them, they would hurt them, they would abuse them, they would vilify them. Then eventually, in the 5th year after the first revelation, meaning the 5th year Nabwi, a verse was revealed which indicated towards migration, that the earth is large and vast, and therefore the Muslims should consider travelling elsewhere in order to preserve and safeguard their religion. So for this reason, when the Muslims they approached Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with this question in mind, then Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam instructed them that they should migrate, or rather they should travel towards Abyssinia. And Abyssinia is Ethiopia. The Quraysh and the people of Makkah, they knew of this place because they had trade links in Yemen. So therefore, and the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned this to them, and the people, they were aware of the king of Abyssinia, that he was a pious man. His name was Asmaha. The title of the king of Habasha, as we mentioned previously, was Najashi, but his actual name was Asmaha, and he was very just, he was a wise man, and also he was a scholar of the Torah and of the Injil as well. And the people in his country, the people within his empire, they would live in peace, they would live with tranquility. He was not an oppressive king. Therefore, after 5 years of the Prophet ﷺ propagating the religion of Islam, in the 5th year Nabwi, 15 Muslims, of them 4 of them were women, at one night, because the Quraysh, they were precautious and they were wary that the Muslims should not escape. So during the cover of darkness, these 15 individuals, they left from Makkah al-Mukarramah. Now these 15 individuals, they are very blessed people because they were migrating away from their hometown. Like imagine if today you had to leave your home, your family, your property, your possessions, everything behind for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not an easy task to do. Yeah, these 15 people, in order so they could say La ilaha illallah, they left everything behind. And of those, we had Sayyidina Uthman al-Ghani and his wife Sayyida Ruqayya, who was a daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sayyidina Abu Hudhayfa and his wife Sayyida Suhayla bin Suhayl. Sayyidina Abu Salma and his wife Sayyidatuna Salma. Sayyidina Amir ibn Rabi'ah and his wife Sayyidatuna Layla bint Abu Hashma. Sayyidina Zubair ibn al-Awwam. Sayyidina Mus'ab ibn Umair. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Maz'un. Sayyidina Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. Sayyidina Abu Sabra ibn Abi Ruh, or Sayyidina Hatib ibn Amr. Sayyidina Suhail ibn Bayda, and Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Right? These were the 15 companions who initially they migrated to Abyssinia, to Habasha. So as they were migrating, and as they had left from Makkah al Mukarramah, these people, they were not some slaves, or they were not small members of community or society. Therefore, almost immediately, the people of Makkah al Mukarramah, they became aware that these people had left. So they sent certain individuals after them. But these people, they had reached the shore, they had reached the coast, and because there were ships already going in the direction of Abyssinia for a very small price of half a dinar, they were able to board the ships on the way to Abyssinia. And unfortunately, or rather fortunately, the kuffar of Makkah, they were not able to capture these people. So they got into Abyssinia, and there they were able to worship in peace, and they would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to their heart's content. And there was no Abu Jahl, and there was no Abu Lahab, and there were none of these tyrants, these oppressors, to stop them from worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this all occurred in the month of Rajab, and in the month of Ramadan, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he began to make his way to the Kaaba as was his custom. And when he reached the Haram, he began to perform ibadah, worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, what was the custom? We hinted towards this before, that whenever the Prophet ﷺ, he would try or attempt to recite the Quran, whenever he would try to propagate the religion, then the kuffar, the mushrikeen, they would make loads of noise. Right? They would try and distract the people in any way possible from listening to the Prophet ﷺ, whether that was shouting stupid things, or whether they was beating instruments, or whatever it was. They would do their utmost to try and stop the people from listening to the words of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they were well aware of the effect the Quran would have on the hearts of the people. But on this occasion, it happened that the people were not present, and they were not able to interrupt the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, now he's performing ibadah, and in specific he's reciting the verses of Surah An-Najm. And as he is reciting, the people, they begin to listen to these verses, and they become mesmerized, and they become drawn towards the words of the Prophet ﷺ. And they all stood in silence as the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is cleansing their hearts and minds. And they're listening, and they're listening. And then the verse of prostration comes, and the Prophet ﷺ, he falls into prostration. Now all of those people in the vicinity of the Haram, when they see the Prophet ﷺ doing sajda without thinking, they fall into sajda as well. Now you can imagine this entire scenario unfolding, and people from afar, they're looking, and they see that in the Haram, that the Prophet ﷺ has fallen into sajda, and all of these other people have fallen into sajda. So a rumor starts to spread. Now the reality is, when these people, when they left from the Haram, when they returned to their families began to rebuke them. Their friends, they started to say, what were you doing? Why did you do this? Right? And many of them, they never accepted the religion. But you can imagine what it looked like. So those people who saw this, a rumor began to spread that the people of Makkah al Mukarramah, they had accepted Islam. And this rumor reached all the way to Abyssinia. And therefore 2 months after the people had left, the people in Abyssinia, some of them, when they had heard that the people of Makkah al Mukarramah had accepted Islam, they began to return. They began their journey back towards Makkah al Mukarramah. They had been separated from the Prophet ﷺ. They had been separated from their family and their friends. So slowly, some of them, they began to return back to Makkah al Mukarramah. But this time, when they were leaving with sadness. Right? But this time they were leaving with excitement and happiness, thinking that now they could return back to their homeland, back to the company of the Prophet ﷺ. But when they reached close to the city of Makkah al Mukarramah, at that point they came to the realization that what they had been told was incorrect. So some of them, again, they chose to return back to Abyssinia, but some of them, they thought they were too close, and so they decided to return to the city of Makkah al Mukarramah. Now those individuals who had returned after migration, initially they hid, but once the kuffar, they became aware of their whereabouts, they began to persecute them, they began to punish them even more than they did before, and they began to hurt them severely. For this reason, after some time, the Prophet ﷺ again, he encouraged the people to migrate back to Abyssinia, especially on hearing with regards to the treatment of the Muslims in these lands. So for this reason, some time later, roughly 100 people, 83 men and 18 women, they again migrated towards the direction of Ethiopia or Abyssinia. And within these people was none other than Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala an. Who was Sayyidina Jafar? He was the brother of Sayyidina Ali, the cousin brother of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the son of Abu Talib. So these people, they migrated to Abyssinia, and again the kuffar, they tried to capture them, but they were able to get to Abyssinia safely. So now the mushrikeen, the polytheists, the kuffar, they gathered together and they say that we cannot allow this. We already had one problem, and now rather than the problem staying within the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah, this problem has spread and has become an international thing. So they decided that what they would do is they would send a delegation, a number of people, they would send them to Abyssinia to speak to the king and to bring these people back. And of those people whom they decided to send, one was Amr ibn al-As, who would later become a companion, who was the son of As ibn Wa'il, one of the greatest enemies of Islam. And they decided to send a man by the name of Ammar bin Walid, who was the son of Walid bin Mughira. Ammar bin Walid was in actual fact part of the plan to try and convince Abu Talib. I mentioned yesterday that there were many plans which they used and they tried to employ in order to stop the Prophet ﷺ from preaching the religion of Islam. And within those plans, one of them was they went to Abu Talib and they said that we know you have much love for Muhammad ﷺ. So what we will do is you give us Muhammad, and in exchange we will give you the son of Walid bin Mughira, Ammara, who is one of the most handsome, one of the strongest people in Makkah al-Mukarramah. So you can take him and have him as a son, and in exchange all we ask is that you give us your nephew. So Abu Talib says, how stupid do you think I am? That I am going to give you my nephew so that you can kill him, and you give me your son so that I raise him? So this plan of theirs failed as well. So these two individuals, they set off in the direction of Ethiopia, and in specific the people of Makkah al-Mukarramah, they had reinforced and emphasized the importance of their task, exactly what they needed to do, and they had laden them with many gifts that they were to distribute once they had reached these lands. So when Amr ibn al-As and Ammar bin Walid, and in another narration it mentions another individual who was sent, when they reached these lands, first and foremost they sought out all of the viziers, all of the advisors to the kings, all of the people of high rank, those people who used to sit within the company of the king, and they began to give them loads and loads of gifts. And once they had given them these gifts, they said to them, you know what's happening in your country? There are criminals from our lands who have escaped, and they have come to your country. They had caused much corruption, much problems in our lands, and they're going to do the same thing in your place. So request for us to meet with the king, so we can speak to him and we can explain to him the situation. So slowly they began to do this, and eventually Najashi, he agreed to meet with them. So when they entered into the courtyard, when they entered into the sitting of the king, the first thing they did was they fell into prostration before the king, as was the custom of those people. Right? So in essence what they were doing, they were trying to get into the good books of Najashi. So they did sajda, and then they presented their gifts, and then they began to speak to Najashi, and they say to him that some people, they are criminals, they have escaped from our land, they have abandoned our religion and the religion of our forefathers, they have come to your land and they have rejected your religion as well. They have invented their own deen, their own way of life. They cause problems in our lands and they will do the same thing in your land. But Najashi, he just kept looking at them. Yes, he never gave them no answer. So now these people, the delegation of the Quraysh, they started looking towards the advisors, hoping that they would say something. So some of the advisors, they say, O king, these are people from their tribe, they know them well. So whatever they're saying, we should listen, we should turn these people away from our country. Now Najashi, he got very angry because he was a very just person and he was very wise as well. He says, how can I do this? How can I punish a people? How can I turn them away from my land without even hearing their side of the story? So he says, go forth Go out and find those people and bring them to me. And so in this manner, the Muslims, they were presented in front of the king of Abyssinia. When they entered into the courtyard, when they entered into the courtroom rather, they did not prostrate before Najashi. And so the viziers, the priests that were in the company, they began to rebuke them and they began to scold them. But Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he did not say anything in return. He did not censure them or rebuke them in return. Rather, he said simply that this is not in accordance with the teachings of our religion. Yani our Prophet ﷺ has taught us that this head of ours has been raised so much that it does not bow before anyone save for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Najashi, when he heard this, he was very impressed. So thereafter, Najashi, he began to speak with the Muslims, and he asks them, he says to them, that what has brought you to our lands? Why are these people, why are they saying that you're going to cause problems in my country? So Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he says, O king, before I answer any of your questions, let me just ask 3 questions. So Najashi says, of course, go ahead. So he says, O king, ask these people, ask these Qurayshis, that are we the slaves of anyone, that they have come running after us to take us back to Makkah al-Mukarramah? Are we runaway slaves? So the king, he asks them, and Amr ibn al-As, he says, no, they are not slaves of ours. They are very good people rather, they're very generous people. Some of them, they hold very high ranks within our society, within our community. So Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he says, okay, the next question is, ask them, have we killed anyone? Have we committed any murder for which they are seeking recompense? For which they are seeking to get revenge? So Amr ibn al-As, he says, again, no, they have not shed a single drop of blood. They have not committed the murder of anyone. So then Najashi now, he's very interested now. He's saying that these lot, they're not slaves, they've not done anything wrong. So Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he asks the 3rd question. He says, ask them, have we stolen any property for which they are seeking recompense? So Najashi, he was so impressed at this point. He says, if this is the case that you have stolen anything, I will give the reward. I will give whatever you have stolen in exchange. But Amr ibn al-As, he says, no, in actual fact, they have not stolen anything from us. Right? So then the king, now he's completely perplexed. He says, then what is your problem with them? Why are you running after them? So they began to say that in reality what it is that they have left our religion and they have left the religion of our forefathers. They have come to your land and they have not accepted your religion either. And in the same way that the unity was lost within our community when they stopped prostrating to our idols, the same thing will happen in your lands. So now Najashi, he turned his attention towards the Muslims, in specific to Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, who was the spokesman, who had been chosen as the representative of the Muslims. And at that point, Sayyidina Jafar ibn Abi Talib, he delivered a sermon, a very, very beautiful sermon, in which he mentioned, he says, O king, once we were ignorant, we were lost in the darkness of Jahiliyyah. We used to be the playthings of the devil. We used to bow before idols, we used to bow before trees, we used to do sajda to anything we could get our hands on. We used to eat the flesh of the dead. We were engaged in all kinds of debauchery, all kinds of evil. We used to bury our daughters alive, we used to oppress our women. Yes. We were engaged in all and every type of evil. The strong of us would oppress the weak, and the weak of us would be tormented and oppressed by the strong. And in the midst of all of this darkness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent us a prophet from amongst ourselves, a person whom we knew well, whom we knew who was truthful and trustworthy. And he came to us and he gave us advice. And he told us that which was prohibited and that which was permissible. And he invited us to leave idol worship and to worship one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we perform prayers and we give zakat and we assist the poor. And after we accepted all of these things and we left all of the evil practices and we began to worship one Allah, then it was our family, our friends, our people who began to abuse us, who began to vilify us, persecute us and torment us. and to try and take us back to the way from which we had left, to try and once again make us bow before the idols and engage in the evil practices which were prevalent. So when the persecution, when the torment was too much, we left from those lands. We left everything behind and we came here to seek peace in order to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by ourselves. And in doing this, even after we left them behind, they chased after us in order to drag us back to the depths of darkness. Now Najashi, he was shocked. Yes, when he had heard all of this, it had a severe impact upon his heart. And the two individuals, the delegation of the Quraysh, they realized they were on the losing side. So in a last resort, in a last attempt, what they said is, "O Najashi, do you know what they believe in regards to Isa and Maryam? Yani your prophet and his mother, do you know what they believe? They have very corrupt beliefs with regard to them." So Sayyidina Jafar radiallahu ta'ala an, he began to recite verses from Surah Maryam, beautiful chapter in the Quran which outlines the belief of the Muslims with regards to Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, and Sayyidina Maryam, Mary, and mentioning that he was a servant and he was a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was born from Sayyidina Maryam, and that Sayyidina Maryam was a chaste woman who had never been touched by a man, and that Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, he blew the soul, the spirit, straight and directly into the womb of Sayyidina Maryam, right? And the entire incident. And when Najashi, he heard the beautiful verses of Surah Maryam, he began to cry to that extent that his beard had become soaked. And the priests who were surrounding him, they began to cry to that extent that the scrolls which they had in front of them had become wet with tears. And when Najashi had heard all of this, then he dismissed the delegation of the Quraysh, and he forced the priests and the viziers and the advisors to return all of the gifts. And Najashi was very, very accommodating towards the Muslims. He let them live in peace within his lands. And in actual fact, he had accepted Islam as well. And he said to the Muslims that verily the Prophet who has come to you, he is a Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the kalam, the word which he has brought, is from the same light as the light of the previous books, the Tawrat and the Injil. And would that I did not have the position of king and the responsibility of king, I would have abandoned my throne and I would have gone and I would have straightened his shoes. And he was a very wise man. And he had much knowledge with regards to the books. He kept the Muslims in his lands and he allowed them to stay in peace. In some books of Seerah, it goes to that extent that they say that there was a time when the empire of Najashi, it was attacked. And the Muslims, they raised their hands and they made dua that Najashi would be successful. And Najashi was so accommodating to the Muslims that he put them on a ship. And he says to them, if the lands are conquered, then you should return to Madinah al-Munawwarah. But if you are successful, then you can stay within the lands. And it's for this reason that, Najashi, the way that he supported the Muslims, the fact that he had accepted Islam himself, that when he passed away, then in Madinah al-Munawwarah, thousands and thousands of miles away, that when the news reached the Prophet ﷺ that he had passed away, then from Madinah al-Munawwarah, in the absence of a body, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he lifted all of the parda, all of the veils, so the Prophet ﷺ could see the body of Najashi, and from Madinah al-Munawwarah, the Prophet ﷺ, he performed the janazah salah of this person, which is called janazah ghaiba. So this is the first migration of the Muslims to Abyssinia. And this is the story with regards to how the Muslims, they migrated to Abyssinia and they lived in Abyssinia and they began to preach Islam in Abyssinia as well. And later, many people within these lands would become Muslims as well. It was also, in relation to this, there's a connection, the story which was mentioned previously with regards to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, that many years after the revelation had begun and the persecution had become to that extent where the Muslims could not worship in peace, it was Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala who had left with the permission of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he too had intended to go to Abyssinia. But when he had left from Makkah al-Mukarramah and he had travelled a short distance, he had run into Malik ibn Dughunna. And when he had seen him, he says, "Oh Abu Bakr, where are you going? Right? Why are you coming in this direction?" So Sayyidina Abu Bakr, he explained that in Makkah al-Mukarramah it's got to that extent now that we cannot worship in peace. We're being oppressed left and right. We could not even take the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibn Ghunna, he says that you cannot leave from these lands. You are the coolness of the eyes of the people of Makkah al-Mukarramah. You earn money and you give to the poor. You assist those who are weak and vulnerable. How can we let you leave from the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah? So he says, come back. And he forced Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala and to return to the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah. And once he had returned, he went to the people and the leaders of Makkah al-Mukarramah, and he says that Abu Bakr, he is under my protection. And no one must hurt him, no one must harm him. So the people and the leaders of the Quraysh, they said, this is fine. We accept that he is under your amn, he is under your protection. But the condition is that he worships Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He worships and he recites the Quran within the quarters of his own home. Because when they recite this kalam, then our people, our children and our elders and our women, they are drawn towards this recitation. Yani they knew the truthfulness of the Quran, but yet their hearts were sealed towards its truth. So Ibn Ghunna, he went back, he explained the conditions to Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, he began to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the privacy of his home. But whilst he was in his house, he would think, yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the worship of whom is correct and is true, I have to worship him in the privacy of my own home, and people are outside and they are worshipping and they're doing sajda to idols. And he knew that Islam one day would prevail, that truth would overcome darkness. So what he did was he made a certain extension to his house, so that way he was within his house, but that people could hear the recitation, and he would begin to perform namaz, for example Fajr Salah, and he would begin to recite the Quran. And day by day the people would increase, and everyone would be drawn to it like moths to a flame, and they would all listen with tears in their eyes, listening to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq reciting the Quran. And when the mushrikeen, when the polytheists, they realized this, they went to Ibn Ghunna and they said, you need to stop this. Before our women and our children, before our families, before they leave our religion, you need to stop this, or we're going to fight against you and Abu Bakr together. So Ibn Ghunna, he goes to Abu Bakr and he says, we had an agreement. So either maintain the rules of our agreement or return my protection. And so it was at that time that Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, and he uttered those famous words. He says, why and what need do I have for the protection of the creation when I have the protection of the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says, go, I do not need your protection. Yes. So he gave this up, and he gave up the protection of this individual in order that he could worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the manner in which he wished to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a summary in regards to these events with regards to the first migration. We'll end here inshallah. Tomorrow we will discuss with regards to how Sayyidina Hamza and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala accepted Islam. We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin طيب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم أكرمني بنور الفهم وأخرجني من ظلمات الوهم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.